Hey everyone. So there are a number of people who have put their lives on the line in the middle of this pandemic in order to ensure that we get the essentials that we need to make it through this devastating crisis. And so every time you go to a grocery store, every time you go to a hospital, every time you see a postal worker delivering the mail, think about how these people are exposing themselves to potentially contracting the coronavirus just in order to provide the services that I think a lot of Americans do take for granted every single day. These are heroes in a lot of ways. And so I think it's so important to make sure that we look out for them and that we protect them. But more importantly, because this I feel like gets left out of the conversation, that we ensure that they get compensated appropriately for the work that they're doing. Now, luckily, there's more and more talk among Senate Democrats about a phase 4 stimulus bill in order to continue helping Americans as they struggle with this pandemic. And one thing that I was really happy to see was that the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, raised the concern of, just the lack of hazard pay for these essential workers. So I have mixed feelings on how Senate Democrats want to approach this. But before I get to critiques or possible flaws, I just want to make it very clear that right now there is one party that's actually concerned about doing right by our essential workers, and those are the Democrats. The proposal that I'm about to give you the details of was co-sponsored by Democrats and only Democrats within the Senate. In fact, Mitch McConnell, who's a Republican, clearly, the Senate Majority Leader, has been clear in saying that he doesn't even want to approach the discussion of a stage 4 stimulus bill, which I think is complete and utter nonsense. And it just shows you what kind of priorities people like Mitch McConnell have. Because the stimulus bill that passed Congress a few weeks ago was, sure, a giant bailout for massive corporations, did have a robust plan in place for unemployment. But when it comes to things like the means-tested stimulus check, it just falls short, to say the least. And there still are not any protections from people getting foreclosed on, for instance, if they have a private mortgage from a private lender. So if you have a FHA mortgage, for instance, they are not allowed to foreclose on you, but people who have mortgages from private lenders are not offered the same protections. Anyway, I'm just giving you like a comprehensive view of where we're at right now when it comes to what Congress has done for us and what some members of Congress are proposing. So now let's get to hazard pay. Again, these are people who typically don't get paid much in the first place. We're talking about grocery store workers who should have been getting paid more even before this pandemic hit. But now that they are putting their lives, their health on the line in order to provide these essential services, Chuck Schumer and other Democrats in the Senate have proposed that they receive $25,000 in hazard pay. So this would be additional money that they would earn, almost like a bonus on top of what they're already earning. So this is actually a decent amount of money. And I like to see a figure as high as that, especially when you consider that right now, if you do end up testing positive for COVID-19, the testing itself might be free based on some of the action that Congress has taken, but the treatment is still not free. And so it really is a hazard, both financially and health-wise, for these essential workers to go out there and do what they're doing. But they're doing it because they're heroes. And let's keep it real, some of them are not privileged enough to be able to work from home and earn a paycheck. And so we need to provide the funding necessary to make sure that they take care of themselves, that they take care of their families, and also to make sure that they have the proper funding in order to take care of any medical bills that should arise from COVID-19. Now, let me be clear about something. I think that it's a disgrace that Congress has not succeeded in passing legislation that would make COVID-19 treatment free. But when you look at this $25,000 figure, some might think, well, that's a lot of money. But when you really look at the grand scheme of things and you consider how much medical bills could be should any of them get sick, it's actually not that much money. Now, the bonus pay, which would amount to a $13 per hour raise, would go to a broad range of essential workers. I mentioned the grocery store workers, but it also includes truck drivers, postal workers, janitors, all sorts of people that you see out there working right now, even though it's incredibly risky to do so. So I do really appreciate how broadly this would apply if this type of proposal were to make it out of the Senate and get signed by someone like Donald Trump. Now, the fact that no Republican has co-sponsored this is troubling because it shows that Democrats would definitely have a fight in Congress in an effort to get this passed. But Democrats are also proposing an essential worker recruitment incentive. So let's say you're not an essential worker now, but there is an opportunity for you to become one. There is an additional financial incentive that Congress, Democratic members of Congress would like to offer. It would be a payment of $15,000, but it would be more specific. It would not be applied broadly to all essential workers. This is more of an effort to attract doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals. By the way, many of whom have been dealing with insanely tough conditions, long hours. I mean, imagine being a hospital worker right now, a hospital administrator, dealing with the federal government, which has now basically like gotten involved in stopping shipments of medical supplies that various hospitals have ordered. And we're going to talk about that in more detail on the main show. But think about the stress, the emotional toll, the physical toll of doing this. All of that would certainly dissuade some people from practicing medicine. And I think that this is an effort to provide just an additional financial incentive to get people who are healthcare and medical professionals to help if they can. Now, one of the issues that I have with this, well, there are a few issues I have, and they're small. I mean, when you really think about it, this is an effort to help people who should be getting paid more in the first place. So overall, I think this is good. However, there are a few problems, including like this Democratic obsession with means testing people, right? So they're arguing that they're gonna do this means testing, if something like this passes, to ensure that people making more than 200 grand do not get any of these incentives. But just give them the money. Because like the thing I worry about with these means tested situations is that it further lags the payment that people need right now, right? So think about how these stimulus checks, which by the way are means tested, are being delayed because we have to basically rely on the IRS. We have to make sure that we filed our taxes. We have to make sure that we provided direct deposit information to the IRS so they can send us that check if we qualify for it. And so it creates more bureaucracy. It ends up postponing payment that people desperately need. And I don't think that there are a ton of people making $200,000 at like grocery stores and, you know, driving trucks. I think that it makes more sense to offer this money, write the legislation in a way where everyone who is an essential worker would get this money on top of what they're already making. And then at the end of the year, when people file taxes, if it ends up that they've made a ton of money and they didn't really need that extra taxpayer funded cash, well, then you can tax them. Okay, I think that makes way more sense. That way we get the money to essential workers right away. So that was one of my small critiques. Mind you, this is in the early phases. Who knows if this even goes anywhere? But then one other issue that I have is, I guess, a broader critique of the way that we treat workers in general, but especially essential workers today. I think that there needs to be more pressure on employers to increase the pay of their employees. Because understand what this is. This is a proposal that would be funded by us, the taxpayer. And I personally have no problem with my taxes going toward fellow Americans, helping fellow Americans in their time of need, especially when it comes to these essential workers who are doing so much for us, right? I have no problem with that. However, I am tired of the federal government subsidizing the frugal cheap and greedy behavior of some of these companies, of some of these corporations. If you are a grocery store worker, if you are still, driving a truck in order to get goods from one place to another, if you are putting your life in danger, and your employer, by the way, is still able to run his or her business, they're still able to function, they're not necessarily hurt by this pandemic the way other companies are, I don't understand why it's so difficult for the employer to chip in and actually provide more funding and more pay for these essential workers. Now, it's different. It's a case-by-case basis. And so I think, obviously healthcare workers are in a different situation than people who work at grocery stores. But, that huge story about what was happening at Amazon. Amazon is the most profitable corporation. They have also gotten huge goodies in Donald Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy, which is why last year Amazon didn't have to pay anything in federal taxes. Why is it that Amazon was unable to provide protective gear for its warehouse workers? Why is it that Amazon is unwilling to increase the pay of those warehouse workers? It's just pathetic. And so while I have no problem with taxpayers chipping in to provide more funding and more pay for essential workers, I do think it's also important to have a broader discussion about the way our system works and how it's usually middle class and working class taxpayers who end up subsidizing the bad behavior of these major corporations which refuse to pay their workers fairly. So that's where I stand on that story. I think that overall, again, it's good that Senate Democrats are pushing for this. I'd like to see more aggressive action from Democrats in general. And now is really the time to make the case for policies that Democrats have claimed that they've been champions for. People need government to act and to do so in a robust way. So we'll follow this story and I'll give you guys updates as they develop.